There are some 40 studies dealing with that issue. The RCMP is conducting a further study on its own. Our government, from the very outset, has set as one of its priorities, one of its most important priorities, tackling crime, including violence against women and girls.
That's the Prime Minister earlier today reacting in French, obviously, to new information regarding missing or murdered Aboriginal women. The RCMP has now confirmed that almost 1,200 Aboriginal women have been murdered or gone missing in the last 30 years. Moments ago, the RCMP released a statement on why they compiled these numbers. They said the following: "We are concerned about the high incidence of missing and murdered Aboriginal women. We remain committed to resolve outstanding cases and seeking closure and justice for families." So, is it time? We've had this conversation before, but we'll have it again. Is it time now, in light of these high numbers, for a national inquiry into missing or murdered Aboriginal women? What would it accomplish, if anything? Joining me now for more, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety, Roxanne James. Beside her, the NDP critic for the status of women, Niki Ashton, and in Winnipeg, Liberal health critic Hedy. Good to see you all, ladies. Appreciate you being here. Okay, let's get into this issue of these numbers that the RCMP has now confirmed, as well as saying how they went about doing this, which was talking to 300 police jurisdictions to compile numbers that I think are much higher than any of us knew before. So 1,186 women that have been murdered or missing. What's your reaction to this news? We'll start with you, Niki Ashton. Does this change the game at all? The last number I think that had been out there was 800, so it was still a very high number. But the fact that the RCMP now has confirmed this number based on statistics they've gathered, does this change anything for you?
Well, it's a shocking number. I mean, if you put it into context, it means that over the last 30 years, 40 Aboriginal women and girls every year did not come home to see their families. I mean, you know, it really speaks to the national scope and the fact that this is consistent over a number of years. The RCMP is out on this. We've heard from premiers. We've heard from national Aboriginal organizations. We've heard from families. There needs to be an inquiry. There needs to be action. These numbers strongly indicate we cannot wait longer.
And the numbers, just so people understand, have been compiled from about 1980, although some numbers go all the way back to 1952 to as recently as 2012. Hedy, your perspective on whether the numbers, the large number, changes anything here?
Look, when there was about 500 women, Anita Neville, who was the critic for women, and our member from Labrador, who was the critic for Aboriginal people, stood up in the House of Commons and asked in 2009 officially for a public inquiry. And that was only for 500 women. So it isn't really about how many women there are. The fact is, at that rate, if there were other kinds of women other than Aboriginal women missing or murdered in this country, there would be an outcry, there would be an inquiry, there would be something. There was nothing. There has been no response from this government, even when the United Nations asked for a public inquiry into missing and murdered women.
Let's get Roxanne James in here. I don't mean to say that the number in any way, makes the situation worse. Obviously, it's not a good situation, period. But the fact that the RCMP have compiled data now sort of changes the story a little bit. They now have a better idea of the scope of this. Does that change anything for the government?
Well, first of all, let me say that one missing person is one missing person too many. And I'm pleased to see that the RCMP is completing this report. We hope that they do release it to the public as soon as possible, because it has not been shared with the government as yet. We're anxious to see it as well. The other thing is that the RCMP has committed to investigating and looking to each and every one of these cases, and I think that's critical for investigations going forward. But let me be clear, now is not the time for another study. In the opening remarks, we heard that there's been 40-odd studies. The RCMP, this is another one. In my previous work on the status of women, we studied violence against women. There's been study after study after study. Now is the time to take real action and move forward with measures, concrete measures that are going to end the violence against Aboriginal women and girls.
Okay, my colleague Catherine Cullen spoke to a woman by the name of Lorna Martin today. Her mother, Marie Jane St. Savard, has been missing since 1987, and she spoke quite emotionally about why she wants a national inquiry. So let me just play that clip so everyone has an understanding of that. Listen.
And a national inquiry would employ a lot of professional people to extend due respect and organize and attend to maybe answer a lot of unanswered questions for families.
So is that idea not important to the government? Do you not want a place where people, sometimes inquiries are there to, you know, be a place where people can gather and give voice to a problem? That's not something the government wants to do.
I think, as I said, we need to take concrete measures. In fact, this government has taken over 30 concrete measures since coming to office to really crack down on crime and to protect women and girls from violent situations. Some of those measures include bills and legislation related to murder, kidnapping,
Is there anything
sexual
particularly
assault.
that's been done for Aboriginal women?
Absolutely. In 2010, in our budget, we introduced measures, $25 million to support initiatives surrounding Aboriginal women and girls and ending violence. And in fact, in our most recent budget, we've allotted another $25 million to continue our efforts to deal with this terrible tragedy. And
But do you feel like right now we have a sense of the scope and why it's happening? Do you think that all those reports have shown that in a you know, start to finish sort of way?
Well, as I said again, the actual report that the RCMP is producing, we have not. It's not been shared with the government, so I can't comment on the contents of that report.
No,
Obviously,
I know, but the 40 other reports
key.
that you and the Prime Minister have talked about, those reports show in a fulsome way the problem and why it's happening and where it's happened and that kind of stuff?
I think we need to really address the issue against violence against women and girls, whether it be on reserves or not. It's an issue that this government takes very seriously. It's one of our top priorities, and I think in the opening remarks from the Prime Minister that was clear.
So, I don't Niki Ashton, maybe you can explain why you think a national inquiry matters. What would it change?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I mean, you know, we've been hearing calls for a national inquiry for years. We've heard from the Native Women's Association of Canada. We've heard from the AFM. We've heard from so many people. And the reason is we need to get to the bottom of why this is happening, why Indigenous women face higher rates of violence than non-Indigenous women, why young Aboriginal women are 5 times more likely than non-young Aboriginal women to be killed. I mean, these are shocking numbers, and there is a difference. The reality of Indigenous women is different. We're not hearing that the government is interested in that. In fact, what we've seen from the government is general investments, and and investments in violence against women are absolutely critical. But we need to get to the bottom of this. In fact, we've also seen funding cuts from the Sisters in Spirit at the Native Women's Association and people that are speaking out and acting on this issue. We are very concerned that the government is not taking action, and as every week and month goes by, we're continuing to hear about Indigenous women that are going missing.
Hedy Fry?
Yes, the reason for a national inquiry is much more than just giving us data and giving us statistics. It looks into the specific reason, as Niki just said, about why Aboriginal women, more than other Canadian women, face these high levels of violence. And so it digs deeper to find the root causes of societal violence against Aboriginal women and other forms of violence against Aboriginal women.
To be fair, though, Hedy Fry, the special committee that had a report, the recommendation to hold an inquiry of which was removed from the report, they did look at a little bit of those issues and talk about some of the issues, like domestic violence, not being able to leave, women not being able to leave their partners or their homes. They looked at some of those issues. Actually,
Rosemary, when I was chairing the Status of Women Committee, we actually looked at the root causes. We spent a year and a half traveling across this country, meeting with women either within reserve, outside of reserve, and in urban areas. And we were not allowed to produce a report by this government. There was an election. When we came back, the government actually took off the report completely out of the agenda. We didn't get to finish it. So why does the government want to stall these reports? The report that you saw that came out of the special inquiry recently, they actually did not give the full report. All of the data that was given on the original report was cleansed. So why is it that this government doesn't want to find out the truth about the issue of violence against Aboriginal women? Why?
Roxanne,
that's a question.
Yes, thank you. I just want to correct the record here. Our government has taken strong action to protect women and girls, Aboriginal women and girls on reserves. In fact, when I sit here and I listen to my colleagues from the NDP and Liberal Party talk about the fact that we've taken no action, I get very upset at that. I can just recall being on the Status of Women and going through legislation. It was S2, it was the matrimonial property on reserves for Aboriginal women. It actually gave Aboriginal women the same rights, the same access to property that every single woman in this country has except on reserves. And this is a bill that has had 4 reiterations going through the House of Commons and the Senate. And just let me finish for a moment, because it's important to note that it took a Conservative government to finally pass this legislation, because for all the years that it came through, it was adamantly opposed and obstructed by the NDP and the Liberal parties. So when I say her and I listen...
But with all due respect, that doesn't address the fact that there are more than 1,000 women missing and murdered now, like in the past.
But all of these things are issues. We need to make sure that women on reserves have the same access, have the same equality as everyone else does in this country.
Okay, but a public inquiry, this is never going to happen under this government. Never.
No, let's face the facts. We need concrete measures. We need action. Again, every legislation, every piece of legislation that Conservatives put through the House, it is adamantly opposed and obstructed by the opposition parties. These are measures to help women, to end violence against women.
Okay, I got to wrap there. We could have gone on for half an hour. I appreciate the debate. It's an important topic, and thank you all for being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Roxanne James, Niki Ashton, and Hedy Fry. Thanks all, ladies.